welcome to the WOLA podcast. My name is Corie Welch. Just a reminder that these podcasts are free and ad-free, but the Washington Office on Latin America is an independent organization that operates entirely on gifts and donations. So please consider supporting our work. The easiest way to do so is to visit wola.org and click donate at the top of the screen. Welcome to a special episode of Latin America Today, WOLA's podcast on human rights, democracy, and social justice in the Americas. I'm Corie Welch, Assistant Director for Communications at WOLA, and while I'm not your usual host, I'm honored to be stepping in for this very special occasion. March is Women's Month, and we wanted to mark it with a conversation that speaks to strength, resilience, and leadership of women across Latin America, particularly those confronting one of the region's most devastating human rights crises, enforced disappearances. Today, I'm joined by Ana Lorena Delgadillo Pérez, a Mexican human rights lawyer with over 2 decades of experience working on human rights, migrants' rights, femicides, and disappearances in Mexico and Central America. She is the founder and former executive director of the Foundation for Justice and Democratic Rule of Law, a regional NGO working across Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. She has helped shape landmark legislation, contributed to historic cases before the IACHR, and worked to build some of the most important forensic and search mechanisms for disappeared migrants in the region. She joins us today in her capacity as a member of the United Nations Expert Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances, one of the UN's oldest human rights mechanisms. Ana Lorena, welcome. It's such an honor to have you.
So happy to be here. Thank you for this invitation, Corie. And so, happy to talk to you.
So can you tell us about yourself and your work? How did you get here?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think I decided to become a human rights lawyer since I was a child. I come from a big family on a town where most of the people migrate to the United States, and this town live of remittances. And I remember that one of my neighbors, she got married, and after some days, her husband, have left to the United States, and he came back after a while, but he returned inside of a coffin. And what I remember was that it was a very painful situation on the town. I remember the silence and the pain around the community about what happened. And I think I was wondering why. I mean, why someone has to die if he only wanted to survive, he only wanted a dignified life. After that, I think the other thing that pushed me to work on human rights was my mother example. Even though that she had a very hard economic situation, we were 10 children, I was the number 9. She always was open to help whoever needed, whoever was asking for help. So I think she has been always my inspiration, like for the work that I am doing. And the last thing I think is something that happened to me when I visited the Zapatista camps. This was around 1996. Do you remember in Chiapas when they have these Zapatista camps? I was on an indigenous community, and I remember very well the time that I was spending there. I could witness all the discrimination, the very hard economic situation that the communities were living because of the decision of economic political decisions in the country, and all the struggle because of the militarization. And I believe that when I was over there, I decided that I wanted to become a human rights lawyer. So how did I start it? So I was studying law in Mexico City, and the first place where I came to learn about human rights was Centro de Derechos Humanos Miguel Agustín Pro Juárez. I was working there with the Jesuits. So after that, I decided that I want to have more training on criminal law, because many of the cases related to human rights violations are linked to criminal accusations. And after that, I was working for a while in cases of femicide in Ciudad Juárez and Chihuahua, first with the government and then with the Argentinian forensic anthropology team in a project that was related to identified bodies of women that have been disappearing in Juarez and in Juarez and in Chihuahua. And after that, I was working for a while in the General Attorney Office in Mexico City, also in the victims area. And then I founded a Foundation for Justice, an organization that is dedicated to work with migrants that have been disappeared in the transit. We were working there with cases of the massacres of migrants that occur in the north of Mexico, and with many cases of enforced disappearances and disappearances in the transit. And now I am a member of the working group on enforced and involuntary disappearances. I'm working there as an expert, and I am also collaborating with the panel of experts for Guatemala for overseeing the appointments of high courts and the General Attorney Office in that country.
So can you give us a bit of context about enforced disappearances in the region? What does that look like? Who is disappearing? Who is disappearing them? And what does the situation for impunity look like?
Well, what I can say is that we have different situations in the region. We have the cases of the past, for example, the cases that occur in dictatorships in Argentina, in Chile, in some other countries. We have cases in armed conflict, in a context of armed conflict, like in El Salvador, Guatemala, and we have cases of when people was trying to defend their rights in some other countries, like in Mexico, and they disappear, for example, during the so-called dirty war in Mexico in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So in many of these countries, we still have people that haven't been found. We still have cases of disappearances that they were never solved. And in many of the regions also we have impunity around those cases. In countries like in Mexico, when you have a history that is marked by impunity, a history where you never did like all the efforts that a country should do to find their disappearance, the disappeared people, or to try to get justice, that history follows you to the present. So I think that is something that is happening in Mexico. Now we have more than 130,000 people that have been disappeared. We have more than 72,000 bodies that are not identified. And in most of the cases, I believe there is more of the 90% of the cases in Mexico, we have impunity. So what I think is that where you have these situations, these very terrible situations of impunity, what happens in a country is that impunity is sending the message that this can happen, that this violence is permitted. So impunity is very much in the center of the repetitions of these violations in many of our countries. But also we have new situations. So we have the cases of the past, and we have new situations in the field of disappearances. For example, we have situations around migration. We have situations around the use of public space. We have disappearances in countries where people is fighting against authoritarian regimes. And we have those cases that are called the short-term enforced disappearances. So these occur, for example, in the cases where the United States decided to send the Venezuelan people to El Salvador. These cases occur in the context of migration, but also for asylum seekers. They didn't even know where they were taken. The families didn't know where they were. So far, we don't have the list of the cases that were sent to El Salvador, neither to later on to Venezuela. So these are new situations that we are facing around the world, disappearances for asylum seekers or for migrants. But we also have these cases of so-called short-term enforced disappearances in contexts like in Venezuela, when they were trying to defend democracy, when they were trying to defend the elections during the last months. We have many people that have been detained and disappeared for a while. We also face these situations in countries with that are marked by a terrible authoritarianism, like Nicaragua, and in countries like in El Salvador, when you have many people that have been detained around the regime of the exception regime, and many of the families, they don't know where the families are.
This podcast episode is part of Women's Month, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how do enforced disappearances impact women,
Mm-hmm.
and what are women doing in response to that?
Mm-hmm. So I think women are very much in the center of enforced disappearances for many issues. Sometimes because they can be victims of enforced disappearance. For example, we have the case of Ruth Lopez from El Salvador, who was disappeared for a period of time. But also we have women that are impacted in a devastating way for enforced disappearances when is the husband or the son or the father the one who disappeared. So I think in those cases, women are impacted by that. They are the ones who have to wake up every day thinking where the loved ones are, but they are also the ones who have to fight for searching them, who have to fight for justice, and they are in the middle of governments or institutions that are very violent through them. Sometimes they criminalize women that are searching for the loved ones. Sometimes they have to suffer all the bureaucracy of the governments. But these women are also a huge example for the region. They are the ones that are fighting the region, so we do not forget about what is happening. So we keep looking for the ones that have been disappeared. What I can see, for example, in countries like in Mexico, is that women, las buscadoras, they have become a very strong reference for courage, for bravery, for this spirit that is always searching for justice and talking about what is happening in the country. These are very brave women that are doing the things that the government is supposed to do. So nowadays, I think they don't only are facing all of these, they are carrying all of this emotional labor, but also these physical things that they have to do for doing the search. And they are the ones who are sustaining many of the countries. They are the ones who are showing us how to face all the injustice that is happening around the world. They have transformed their grief into an organized and global movement for trust, justice, and dignity. And I think that this month, but also all the years, we should honor them. We should honor all the women that are fighting for the disappearance, but also all the women that are fighting to help them somehow to find an answer in these cases.
Okay. And so you testified in the Cottonfield case before the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, which is one of the most important cases on femicide in the hemisphere and the world. Femicide and disappearance are often treated as separate issues, but your career seems to have kind of covered both. Why does that separation matter, and what do you get wrong when we don't connect those two issues?
So I think the experience of Ciudad Juárez and Chihuahua was one of the most important in my personal and in my work as a human rights defender, because all of the things that I live over there, I have seen some of the most brave women in Ciudad Juárez and Chihuahua, and also I have seen all types of violence against them. I mean, it's not only the violence that they live when the daughter was killed, but it was all of this institutional violence, the violence where the government were denying what happened to the women, to the girls, the violence when they were trying to keep bodies that did not belong to these families, and the violence of not building a system that can give an answer to this woman. So this thing about not linking the homicide with the disappearances is very common in many places. For example, I remember in Ciudad Juárez, we were looking bodies of women that have been disappeared, bodies that were unidentified in many of the registers of the government. And I remember this case when we decided to go to the medical school in Ciudad Juárez. We made this intervention because we thought that some of the bodies that we were looking were there. And when we were looking at the files of the bodies that they were keeping for a long time, we found these women that was on the poster with other pictures of the women that were disappeared around all the city. So this woman was on the poster, and at the same time, her body was in formal, being used for training the students in the medical school.
Oh
And it was very easy to see, because she was on formal, it was very easy to see that she was the one that was on the poster of the women that have disappeared. And they never made the connection, not even the students that were living in the same city, and not even the prosecution office. So this is something that happened very much. And if in Mexico, for example, if we have 130 cases of enforcement of people that have been disappeared, and if you have 72,000 bodies unidentified, why don't you have answers for 72,000 families if you have there the bodies? You don't even have to go and look for the bodies. The system has the bodies. So I think what we need in those cases is a real will of the government to give an answer to the families, to do as much as they have to do to identify those bodies. But also we need a forensic system that is consolidated, that is professional, that is independent, that the families can trust. So at least we can have those identification of those bodies that Mexico, but many other countries have, because this is the same situation in some other countries. They have bodies, but they cannot identify because they have not made enough efforts to go and look for the families.
So when I was living in Honduras, I worked with COFAMIPRO, the Committee of the Families of the Disappeared Migrants of Progreso. So how do countries work together in cases where there are migrants that are coming through Mexico or for other places? How do you work across borders in cases of disappearances when it can connect between multiple nations?
Well, maybe I have two examples. COFAMIPRO is a huge example of searchers, of these transnational searchers, mothers and sisters, las madres buscadoras transnacionales. So there are two examples of how you can work in a transnational way. One is the Border Project from the Argentina Forensic Anthropology team. So the Argentina Forensic Anthropology team is working directly with this committee of families in Honduras, in El Salvador, in Guatemala, in Mexico, in some countries where they can organize, and they are building these forensic databases where they have in one place all the information of the migrants. And then the Argentina, what they are helping in this project is to open the possibility to cross the DNA of these families in these communities with the remains of people that is on the route, on the morgues that are on the route to the United States. So this is a way to connect them with what is happening on the route. And the other example is the project that I was leading on Foundation for Justice. We were working very close with these mothers from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. I remember that I started to work first at the Border Project with the Argentina Forensic Anthropology team. And one time these mothers faced me and told me, well, yes, it's very good that you are doing work in terms of trying to find them among the bodies, but we need and we want to search for them alive. And also we deserve justice. So that's when I thought that we should start a project to connect families from different countries with organizations and families in the country where they disappear, when you have the investigations. So that's how we started this project. It's a project that is working with families in several countries and in Mexico, connecting families and cases with the places where have been investigated, and pushing public policies so the families do not have to travel to another country to have an answer. It's a project that it has just begun. I mean, there are many challenges, but it's also a hope, because this is what the families have been looking for, an answer, and an answer from the country where they are living.
So you mentioned this earlier, but we last year saw a very famous case of enforced disappearances happening in the United States with migrants. I think obviously the most public
case that we saw was the migrants detained or transported to Secot in El Salvador. But I think we're also seeing other examples of that in migration enforcement in the United States. And so, for you, as someone who has spent decades studying this in Latin America, what do you see when you look at what's happening in the United States, and what does it tell us about the state of democracy here?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that the working group on enforcement and involuntary disappearance, the working group made a general allegation. That is a communication to the United States government. This happened in the session of January and February 2024. This was during Biden administration. Because the working group received information that allegedly some enforced disappearances of migrants were happening here in the country. And I'm saying again, this was during the Biden administration. So at that time, many individuals, including women, children, pregnant women, and people with disability, have been placed in a situation that meet the criteria of enforced disappearances because they were placed in facilities or in places by the Custom and Border Protection, by CBP. And in those places, those families were held incommunicado for a period of time. So the families cannot communicate with the lawyers or with the family. And imagine a family being in Honduras, El Salvador, and in Guatemala. And if they speak another language, how can they have an answer about where they are? So these are the situations that were documented in this document that was sent to the United States. There were also very, very, very hard situations. For example, situations related to family separation. In some occasions, they were separating the mother from the kids, and they didn't know where they were. I mean, the mother didn't know where the kids were, or the kids didn't know where they were or where the mother was. I remember was one case of a boy, of a man of 18 years. He was someone with autism. The mother asked the government not to separate him from her because of the autism. The government didn't care. They separate the mother from the children. And later on, she found out that he was deported to Mexico. But also we documented cases that involves the U.S. Coast Guard, where military intercepted more than 12,000 Haitians. And they were in these ships for a long period of time in very insane situations. For example, with no adequate food, with no adequate water, very bad sanitation possibilities, and with no contact with lawyers or families. So all of these situations were documented in that general allegation. But also we saw these cases, what I just told about, the cases of people from Venezuela that were sent to El Salvador, and that we didn't know where they were, we didn't know who they were, and families didn't know what to do in those cases. So in the United States, we are documenting more and more these situations, and I think it's very important for this country, first, to have regulated the crime of enforced disappearances. That is something that it is not regulated, like criminally. And secondly, have public policies for enforced disappearances, public policies to prevent, but also public policies for the families to search the loved ones, and for justice and reparation on those cases.
Okay. And just after talking to you through this interview, I know that this is a very heavy subject, and throughout all of your work over the years, what motivates you to keep going? What gives you hope in this context?
Okay, what I can say is that I feel very privileged to work on human rights. I love what I do, and I think that dedicating my life to human rights, to defend human rights, and to try to do something about these unjust situations and about what is happening in countries where you have a lot of authoritarianism, or where you have countries where a lot of impunity just to do a small thing, for me, it makes a sense on my life. But also, I have to say that many of my inspiration comes from the families that I know, not only here in Mexico, but in many places in the world. Now that I am working in the working group, I think families are an inspiration because they never stop. It doesn't matter that they don't have money. It doesn't matter that they do not know how to start a case. It doesn't matter that they don't know anything about the systems. They are always fighting and they never get tired. They are an inspiration because they are trying to transform the situations that we are living in many countries, and because they also uh, always are there to remind us that we should do something to stop violence in the world and to stop all of these situations that are leading us to live very different situations around the world, like not only the wars that we have around the world, but the very close unjust situations that we are living in the country. So families are always an inspiration for me. Also, these human rights defenders and journalists that are putting their life in danger to try to help those, to try to help the victims, but also to fight to have a better country and a better world.
Ana Lorena, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for your work and for carrying this with such dedication and clarity for all of these years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me, and very happy to be here. And I hope that this inspiration that many of the human rights are living around the world, from the families and from those that are searching justice and their loved ones, inspire other people in the world. So at least that we can raise the voice for those that are fighting.
This conversation is part of WOLA's recognition of Women's Month, a moment to honor not just the women we interview, but the thousands of women across Latin America who search, organize, testify, and refuse to be silenced in the face of disappearances, impunity, and other injustices. If you want to learn more about WOLA's work on human rights in the Americas, visit us at wola.org. I'm Corie Welch. Thanks for listening to Latin America Today.